7 evening show. All right, well, of course, sitting to my right here, brothers, is the great Terence Blanchard. Being a former player myself, I had no idea last week I did a phone call and say, look, mind doing a short interview with Terence Blanchard. I wanted to go out and see, but once I got back up, I said, sure, why not? So it's a pleasure to be here with you, definitely. Before we get kind of to the things of some other subjects, too, from your own words, and of course, it's not supposed to be. Tell us about yourself, upbringing, you're from New Orleans, and how you came out to get to where you are.
Well, I grew up in New Orleans. I guess growing up in New Orleans, you can't help but have some type of musical experience. I mean, music is everywhere. So I was no different than most kids. Played in marching bands, played in R&B bands, doing all that stuff. But when the jazz brought bit me at a very young age, and kind of followed that all my life. I was very fortunate enough that when I left high school, I went to Rutgers University and started playing Lionel Hampton while I was there because of
No, I just turned
okay. Played with Lionel Hampton while I was there because of the band director at Paul Jeffries. Left that band and started working with Art Blakey, and that's when I started traveling all over the world. My first tour of Europe was like a 10-week tour of Europe, and I was like 19 years old. So we talk about culture shock. I was a culture shock. Left that band after being there for 4 years. Started calling down a guy named Donald Harrison, another young talent from New Orleans, great jazz saxophonist, and we called that band for 3 years. I think 3 or 4 years. Then went out on my own, and right before I went out on my own is when I met Spike and started working with him. I met him on, I get confused now. I think it was Dude Right, School Days. Dude Right Band, whichever one came first. And then we just kind of developed a relationship at that point. I was coaching Denzel Washington in Mobile Blues, and we had to record some of the music prior to us practicing shooting the scenes. So in the session, I was sitting at the piano and playing a piece, and Spike asked me, he said, "What is that you're playing?" And I told him it was a piece that I actually was writing for an album that I was going to go to Columbia. It's called Sing Some Way, that was written for all the kids that were massacred in South Africa in that event. He liked the piece so much, he said, "Well, can we use it?" And I said, "Sure." We recorded it just as a solo trumpet piece, that thing. And I don't know if you remember the movie, but the scene with Denzel is on the bridge playing trumpet while Wesley is with his girl. So when we shot the scene, and we got the scene back, well, Spike got the scene back to everything, he kept saying that the scene was empty and he wanted to add something to the music. So he asked me if I could write an orchestral arrangement for it, and I told him yes, even though I had never done that before. But that was kind of like my entree into the world of film. Because once we finished that, he liked what I had done, and he told me I had a future in business. But I thought he was just being nice, but he called me Jungle Fever. That was the first thing that I've done for him, and I've been doing just about all these movies since. I haven't done Girl 6 and He Got Game. Just about done all the rest of it.
Let's see. Oftentimes, no matter where we are in history, life has a tendency to imitate art, and art imitates life, and vice versa. It's a little bit imitate. And music, or excuse me, the arts in general, always parallels what's happening, no matter what particular medium is, whether it's music, visual art, poetry, spoken word, things of that sort. What are some of the issues that concern you with what's happening now in our society, and how you see music from a personal standpoint, how you can address that, jazz, as far as the world of jazz and music in general?
Well, what's interesting about jazz in that question is that Herbie Hancock has always been a been a hero of mine, but he's also been a good mentor over the last, I would say, 10, 12 years. And, you know, whenever we're together, we talk about a lot of different things. And one of the things that's been concerning me is just the whole political climate that we live in, you know, and how it seems as though politics are doing more to polarize the country than people project. And it's very interesting because now the media has gone down to it, you know, with the various points of view, whether it be from MSNBC or Fox. There seems to be very little balanced reporting going on. And as evidenced by the stuff that happened today with the healthcare summit, one of the things that we always talk about as artists is to try to figure out a way to one of two things. Social commentary is always a must for us, but also being an example. So with the last record that I've done, Choices, you know, I enlisted the help of Dr. Cornell West to talk about certain topics that were confronting us in terms of choice, because I think choice is an attribute that we don't take as seriously as we should, you know, because a lot of times we feel helpless. So, you know, what we wanted to do was examine the whole notion of choice and how those choices can affect your everyday life as a human being, us as a society, the choices that we make. So in that regard, our social environment will inform and give purpose to what we do as artists. You know, the reason why I say all of that is because, you know, when I was talking to Herbie about this, Herbie is doing an album, he's doing it right now. What he wants to do an album of artists from various parts of the world, show symbolically in terms of the music, in terms of how we all come together. So I think it's really important for us, while we still understand that it's entertainment, you know, that it still serves a purpose in some regard. I think it's really incumbent upon us to do that because, frankly, that's how I fell in love with music as a kid, you know. As a young teenager, when I started listening to Miles Davis, John Coltrane, listening to John Coltrane, but, you know, his piece for the girls, children in Alabama. That piece is very powerful and it makes you reflect. It makes you question and examine. I think that's what music really should do.
So you feel a sense of obligation as a musician and the platform that you're able to establish for yourself is a little bit bigger than the average person. You reach a lot of people, so you feel obligated to address it.
Well, I don't know if I feel an obligation, because I don't like having that kind of question. I don't know if I would call it an obligation, but I do feel the necessity to speak about certain things. And it's not about, and I want to be clear about it, it's not about my point of view. It's not about that at all. I just think that it's about making people examine, making people reflect, you know, but do it in a very honest way, you know. That's one of the things I was really proud about the other CD we did tell about as well, because I think that was interesting about that CD is that a lot of people were having various reactions to the music, whether they wanted to or not. And I think that's what art should do. You know, that's what art has done for me. I mean, you know, I was looking at the exhibit in that film, and some of those pieces were very powerful. And it's like, you know, I didn't expect to have those reactions tonight before I came in here, but that's what art should do. Art should make you reflect and examine your own existence.
Let's see here. You mentioned that when Spike Lee asked you to expand your solo trumpet to a larger orchestral range, you hadn't done that up to that point. I saw an interview earlier when you were speaking about a particular composition teacher that you have on your way up. And the interesting thing about it is that you mentioned that despite the fact that you were in the academic setting, this particular teacher did not use a book.
Oh, yeah. Dickinson is his name. He's a great classical composer. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be giving them a call. I just had 2 commissions. I got commissioned to write an opera for St. Louis Opera Company. Really excited about that. And I also got commissioned by the Louisiana Philharmonic, right? So I'm going to be giving them a call to help me with my orchestrations. But one of the things that I love about Roger is that Roger understood that when I studied with him, I was 15 years old. You know, and he didn't want to bog me down with technicality and terminology. He taught me all of the fundamentals of theory, composition, and development by actually showing me how to use these things. We didn't sit down and say, this is tertial harmony, or this is sonata or allegro form. You know, I got that later on, and I got that at various points of my education. But he wanted me to really experience those fundamentals in my own world. And it was an amazing experience because it took me, I mean, I guess like most of us without teachers, it took me a number of years later to realize the profound nature of it, because when I got a chance to write for orchestra, all of those things were coming to bear, and I didn't realize it, you know. And when it hit me one day, as I'm composing some stuff for a film, I think the next time that I saw Roger, I had to just go up to him, man, and tell him how appreciative I was for the experience that I had with him, because he could have taken a strictly academic approach and made me sit down and say, okay, when I was 15 years old, my attention span was like that. And, he figured that's not the best way to teach this guy. He wanted to engage me. And it had a profound effect on me. I mean, as a matter of fact, even with the stuff that I teach, to this day, they're still based on the
So you, as far as your teachers now, you try to get away from the textbook, so to speak?
I don't use a textbook at all. I don't use a textbook at all. I sit down and I start to talk about the fundamentals of harmony, theory, counterpoints, and then I start to show guys. Roger has this thing called "If I Could Tell You I Would." It's a technique that he uses to show you how to manipulate the original idea. It's an interesting concept because it's based very similarly to Arnold Schoenberg's craft of musical composition. It's the same theory without the technical terms. So those are things that I still teach to this day to some of my students. And it has a great effect on them because what it does is it challenges them to really think. Because, just to give you a little bit of an example, in the jazz world, a lot of times young jazz musicians are reactionaries. For the young jazz people in the room, no offense. but what tends to happen is when we write or when we play, we react to all of our favorite recordings that we love for years and years and years and years. Well, you're not that old, but years. But the thing that always amazes me is that when you ask a young person to write a composition, they may have really great ideas, but what happens is they start to abandon the ideas and then start to react to things that they've heard, things that they've listened to, and those things start to seep in to what it is that they created, right? Well, what if I could tell you I would do is tell you that everything that you can create, baseline, counterline, harmony, can come from that original phrase. And when you start to do that, then you have to really start to examine what is the rhythmical emphasis of the tune. What is that motivating propulsion of the thing that may have perpetual motion? Where's that coming from in the musical idea? And when you start to extrapolate those things, you may come up with something different that's not part of the norm. And it's all based on their ideas. So when I teach my students this, I'm always amazed at the things that they come up with. Because I'm not telling them write like this. I'm not telling them that. I'm just showing them how to take their own ideas. And that's the beautiful thing about what Roger is talking. Because, you know, he always used to say, music is always calling. The ideas are always calling. Sometimes we don't listen because we are afraid of our own existence, you know, having validity. You know, but what he's instilled in me is that we're all valid. You know, we all have a point of view that's extremely valid. And I think the more you examine that, the more the world can be beneficiaries of individual thought, as opposed to going back to political and the polarization of what is happening, trying to get people to think in one or two different camps. You know, I don't think that's what, you know, America should be about. Definitely it's not what should art should be about.
Yeah, I found out when composing music also, or at least I found myself involved, hopefully, and continue to evolve more when I'm really composing honestly. I'm truly trying to write what I hear. What it ends up being from an analytical standpoint after the fact is just happens to be what it is. I'm not trying to write in a particular form. I just simply write what I hear.
But the main thing about it is to not be afraid. I mean, really, not be afraid. All right, I'll give you a little example. Watch this. All right, just remember these words. If I could tell you, I would. I know y'all supposed to ask me questions, but I'm going to ask y'all some questions, if you don't mind. If I could tell you, I would. Now, just 2 or 3 people come up with a sentence only using those words and just shout them out. I have no exercise conditioning. Anybody, don't be afraid.
If I could tell you about racism, I would show
No,
you.
only using those words.
Oh,
Only using those words. Could
so
that,
give us an example.
no. No. That's why I'm trying to get your example. Go ahead. I want you to examine yourself.
I would tell you if I could.
Very good. Your hand in the back.
What I said?
There you go. One more. Just one more. I think there's one more out there.
If I could tell you.
Say that again?
If I could tell you.
Okay, good. Now see, all of those sentences make sense. All of those things came from your original idea. So imagine if that was a musical idea. We had 3 very different phrases that came from that musical idea. So there's no need to abandon this idea to develop it into a larger piece. But here's the other part of it that I would submit to you. We get conditioned and we get afraid to go out on a limb. Because what would happen if I said, if I would tell could, if could would. Could tell I, would could would. So now I'm changing all of these variables that on the surface seem to not exist, but they're there. And the reason why we don't examine them is because we're conditioned not to really examine who we are. Because the first thing that happens, I would be willing to bet with a lot of young musicians is that they come up with something and they go, oh man, that's horrible. Oh man, it ain't good. You know what I mean? But the thing is, you're not giving it a chance. Because what I do with all of my students is that I tell them to take a musical idea and I show them how to develop these permutations. It takes a while, it's very tedious, but once you go through all of them, you find something. And then once you find that thing, I can show you how to develop it. Now the interesting thing is, once you unlock that door of creativity, man, you should see what people come up with. You know, and that's the thing that I get excited about. And that's the thing, that's the reason why, I know I keep bringing back things back to politics, but that's one of the things that frustrates me about politics. Because see, what we're talking about is liberating people, having people create, bring fresh ideas to the table, things that we haven't thought about. But the thing is, we can't be afraid of that process. You know, and I think that's what's been happening in our country. We are afraid of those new ideas. When I hear people talk about we want to take the country back, I get nervous because I don't know what that means. Take it back to what? And I don't mean, and I'm not trying to take sides, whether it be liberal or conservative. It's not about that. Because they're all buzz phrases that both camps use. I would suggest to you, when you start dealing with art like this, the thing that happens is it makes you examine your life the same way, the exact same way. Because when you start stepping outside of the norm musically, it makes you think about that when you're reading the news, when you're raising your kid. in anything that you do. There's no separation between the two. There shouldn't be.
Let's talk about some of your experiences and how that plays into how you go about proposing or attacking whatever project. Particularly, are there any experiences that you had that at the time seemed very insignificant or matter of fact or just kind of consequential? And then later on in life, you realize, man, that particular one really has affected how I approach music or a particular project.
I mean, there are a number of them. When I was with our Blake, I was 19 years old. That phrase, young and dumb, is very true. I was 19 years old when I joined the band, and I was meeting all of my heroes. But it was such a, I can't explain it. You know how it's like getting on a roller coaster. You know, and the roller coaster goes so fast, you can't really appreciate the scenery because you're just trying to hang on, right? But after you get off the ride, then when you have a moment to reflect, you can sit back and go, damn, that was beautiful. That was, you know. So it was like that point being in our Lakers band for 4 years. I mean, I kept meeting everybody, man. I met Miles Davis, Wayne Shorter, who else? All my heroes, Freddie Hubbard, Willie Shaw, everybody, Sonny Rollins, Max Rose, Tony Williams. You know, I met all those people in that period. You know, and the thing that was really interesting about it to me, they were treating me like a member of that world. You know, and I wasn't accustomed to that. You know, but and the thing about it, it has like a really wild effect. It had a wild effect on me. By them treating me that way, I always kind of looked at it like I never want to let them down. So that always made me work hard, you know, to make sure that I earned their respect. But so that's one of those moments, and inside of there are a lot of moments. I mean, you know, I played and I'll tell you this story because this one scared me to death. Played a jazz festival in Jacksonville, Florida, in 1983. Never forget it, never. It was televised, right? And there was a segment of it at the end. I was playing with our Blake, you know, a segment of it at the end where they had an all-star trumpet summit thing. It was supposed to be, check this out, Dizzy Gillespie, Freddie Hubbard, John Fadds, and Wynton myself, right? Wynton didn't want to do it.
Why?
Well, I don't know. So they asked me to do it, right? And I said, sure. Dizzy Gillespie, Freddie Hubbard, John Fadds, and me. You know, and then Art Blakey was in the band. I can't remember who was playing piano. I think it was Billy Taylor. I can't remember who was playing bass. And Buddy Williams was playing drums. So the thing was televised. I go to Italy, right, to jazz festival in Perugia, Italy, and I was in the Rosetta Hotel, which has a nice little courtyard. I come out of the hotel in the middle of the day, and like 3 or 4 journalists, Italian journalists, run up to me with a microphone, and they say, well, what do you think about what Miles Davis said about you? And I was nervous because I'm like, well, what did he say? That's first. Get that out of the way. So when they told me what he said, I told him I was really honored because he was my hero. He watched that broadcast. He saw that broadcast, and somebody asked him, about young and upcoming musicians, and he mentioned my name. So when you talk about something that you think is insignificant, that's definitely one. And as a result of that, he had that same trip. He had come to Italy, and I also met him on that trip. And it was funny because he went up to his gig, and back then Miles Davis was such a star, man. They cleared a path for him. I never seen him do that for nobody. I don't care. I've never seen that. Well, they had the security, and he would just, power people in the Seagull Park, and he would just walk on through. And he'd get up to the stage, and the crowd would come back, and then by the time they would get up, they'd clear the path, and then he'd come out. So when he walked by me, the drummer, Al Foster, he looked at me, and he could tell I never met Miles. I said, you ever met Miles? I said, no. So I walked into the dressing room, and before I said anything, Miles looked at me. So that was a moment in my life.
That's trippy. really talk like that.
I can't tell you what everything else he said.
Yeah, I'm sure.
It was very encouraging.
Color. Man, I almost lost the train of thought here. Let's see, the actual composing process, we talk about composing for movies. What is the actual process for the movie? Sit down with who the director, of course, hopefully speak on Spike Lee, and all the way to the point where you guys are actually in the studio recording, syncing up the music with the actual scenes. What's that process?
Well, I mean, you know, with all directors, there's always going to be different variables, but there are some constants in the process, and I'll speak to those. I mean, generally, the first thing you want to do is make sure you want to do the film. And, you know, that may sound like a joke, but it's true, because, you know, I've accepted some projects just by the script, and I'm going to tell you which ones they were. And when I saw the film, I was like, oh my God. Can I get out of this? And you can't. So that's the first thing. That's the first thing that I want is make sure you know all the players that are involved, because it's very important, you know, from who's directing, acting, producing, the whole nine. Once that happens, you want to have a conversation with the director, you know, about his vision for the film, because like any artistic endeavor, there are millions of ways of approaching it conceptually. So I try to get as much information about how a director wants to tell a story, you know, as much as I can. Then the next thing is to watch the film, you know, and when you watch the film, at least when I watch it, I try to watch a film the first time like anybody else. I want to see if the film is moving me. I want to see if on the slow period in the film, the speed and tempo of the film, the look of the film, all of that, the length of it, and how does it flow. Because, you know, sometimes I've worked on films that can be 2.5 hours, and you watch it, it will feel like an hour and a half. And I've worked on some that are the other way too. Try to limit those. But once I watch the film, then I'll start to break it down in my mind. Now, when I say I watch it, I try to watch it 4 or 5 times, you know, because we want to get to understand the film. Then I try to break it down in my mind about those sections that I'm talking about. Where is it speed up, where is it slow down, does it count there, does it need music, etc. Then, you know, we go back with the director, and we'll have a spotting session where we'll sit down and we'll talk about just that, spotting out where the film needs music, where it doesn't. And sometimes those can be the toughest negotiations between the composer and the director. And it depends on the experience of the director I find. Most experienced directors will trust their film. So, you know, I'm the type of person, I don't even like a lot of music sometimes in movies, especially when you have great performances, you know. But sometimes directors may not trust the film, and they may think the music needs to tell an audience what to think. You know, so sometimes I have those discussions about, no, I think you should lay back, I think the performance is there. And there are valid reasons for that, because you got to remember, a director's like living with this thing all day, every day, for like months and months and months. So sometimes their objectivity kind of goes out the window, you know, but their anxiety stays. So once we spot the film, then I start to give a director themes if we're going in that direction. Spike is a very thematic driven person, so I'll start to give him themes. I'm working on a film right now called Red Tails. It's about the Tuskegee Airmen with Anthony Hemingway, young director produced by George Lucas. And he's not a theme driven person. You know, him, I'm giving him like rhythmic things, very colorful things, none of which have any type of thematic material attached to them. So it depends on the director. But once we start to iron out the sonic palette, I guess, then I start scoring, you know, and I score as it comes to me. Now, I'll tell you this, I do create a spreadsheet. Now, if you guys don't want to be film composers, or film composers out there, I'll just talk technically for a second. I think it's very important to sketch out a spreadsheet of where your score is going to be. And what I mean by that is I'll have a spreadsheet, and if I have certain themes or certain type of sonic things, I'll list them at the top. And we have a system in the film industry where we use the number for the first number we use in what we call a cue, which is a piece of music. The first number we use is the reel that the music is in. Then it will say N, obviously for music, for those of us with the channel. And then it will give the piece of music for that reel. So 2M3 will be the third piece of music on reel 2. Okay. So now what I'll do is, as I list my themes up here, I put where 1 and 1 is, where 1 and 2 is under those themes. And what it does is it starts to give me a breakdown of how many love themes I may have, how many action sequences I may have, so forth and so on. Because, you know, when you watch a film, it's about the story. And one of the things that's always interesting to me is that the love theme may come up maybe like 1 or 2 times. But it's so impactful, people may have sworn that they heard it like 5. So that's very important to see the arc of your score and to keep track of that arc while you're scoring. You know, so I always have to make sure that I stay on track.
Also, along with the scoring film, I noticed with this film that I've watched a few times before coming here, and obviously seeing it again tonight. Tell us about the use of silence, if you will, because from an improvisational standpoint, oftentimes younger cats were, I think we all visit, but sometimes we get on this play as much as you can. Just try to be the baddest cat on stage, I think. Then you walk on stage and they say, you know, you play to me, you know, you space. One of the greatest musicians ever used space would be just play one note and just not play for a good minute and then come back and start playing again, just very experimental. Tell us about the use of space when no music is actually appropriate.
Well, it's always interesting when I talk about this because I know I can talk a lot. And the example that I use is a person who talks a lot. You know, when you hear words back to back to back to back to back to back, you tune out, right? Because they start to have less meaning, right? But if I start to say something like very poignant and I pause, all of the minds become very active in the room. And you are assimilating what it is that I heard, I hope. Some of you may be thinking groceries. But I think silence is always a thing, if used correctly, can add great drama to a film, can add great humor to a film by not selling on the joke. But it's a thing that it has to be used, it has to be done in a very tasteful way. I learned this a lot working on Spike's films because I said Spike is a very thematic-driven person. So sometimes he'll ask me to write a very long cues. And when I watch these cues, you know, you have to be in the room with Spike when he's spotted. He does this thing, you know, and I'm sitting there thinking. And I've learned the differences in our approach to spotting now. I mean, I didn't understand it before, but now I do. I'll go, are we out here? He goes, no, still going, still going. So what I've realized is that when I say, are we out, that's the silence. Because for me, I'm feeling something coming to a pause. But when Spike says we're still going, that's the overall sentiment of the scene. You know what I'm saying? So it's like he wants us to still be in it. You know, from the moment he tells me the beginning, from the start of it to the end. But what I'm hearing of all those pregnant pauses in between, they kind of add meaning to the Bible.
I found out you mentioned you were working on a movie produced by George Lucas, it's Star Wars. And of course, all Star Wars films have music from beginning to end. John Williams, he just composed completely throughout, and to probably compose a film produced by George Lucas. I'm sure you're going to be using a lot of space. So it's kind of ironic.
And it's a World War II movie about the Tuskegee Airmen, so there's going to be a lot of stuff going on. Just to tell you, it's a really good movie. Action sequences are off the chain because they're going to use these P-51 fighters. But the way they're doing the CGI, it's going to be a thing.
I think I just want to open up for
Sure.
some questions, so I guess just raise your hand and get it off doing as much as possible.
I'll wait. I answered all of the questions. Yes?
When you were scoring a film, you had certain instrumentation in mind, and relatedly, are there certain groups of performers, musicians that you return to over and over again to record the soundtracks?
I use the guys in my band a lot, but again, it depends on the director. Like working with Spike, Spike loves orchestra. He loves to have orchestra. And the reason why we didn't have orchestra in this thing, because this was more like a PSA for us. We kind of all did this out of love for the subject, you know, so I don't think anybody really got paid to do this. So that's why this thing is like really small, you know. But generally speaking, I personally try to let the film speak to me, you know, like this film that I'm working on now, Red Tails. You know, there's going to be these action sequences, right? So when I'm looking at these African American fighter pilots and these scenes, the thing that I keep thinking about is, wow, these are African Americans fighting in World War II. Their sensibility of purpose has to be very profound and very different from everybody else's experiences, just based on why they're there and what they're fighting for, not only for freedom in the country, but also to kind of liberate a whole a group of people. So for me, immediately that says, okay, I want action music, but I want action music that's of the culture. So I started creating these rhythmic things for this director that we're going to use, hopefully, that are all based in I won't even say Afro-American, based in the African tradition. I'm using djembe drums, I'm using a lot of different things to create these rhythmic palettes. But I'm using them in a way that a film composer would use, in the action sequences. So what that says to me is that I'm still servicing the film, but hopefully the music will bring a different kind of flavor to it. So the film starts to tell me to bring those things out. So I'm also hearing trumpet, but I'm not hearing trumpet like drum and bugle blow trumpet. You know, I'm not hearing it like that. And the film takes place in Italy. So obviously there's some sounds musically from the Italian's point of view that need to be represented. And the funny thing about it is I just did a World War II movie with Spike, Miracle at St. Anna, so I'm trying not to use some of the same things that I used in that film. Because in that film, we used solo violin in some spots, mandolin in some spots. There are a lot of different things that we try to bring into play there. So I try not to say, you know, I want to use a certain group of instruments for a film. I let the film tell me what it means first. Now having said that, like I said with Spike sometimes will say, oh man, I would like to use so-and-so in this film, or I'd like to use so-and-so in this film. And then that also will be an added color that I have to take into and factor into the process. But you know, I think most composers, we try to live with the film for a minute and really try to design, you know, a palette of colors for the film. Yes?
Would you give us a little preview of your concert tomorrow night? What and talk a little bit about your band and what you're going to do.
I have no idea what we're going to play tomorrow. No, we're probably going to play some music from the latest CD. I mean, but the type of band that I have a band full of young, very talented, very creative musicians. Bryce Winston on tenor saxophone from Tucson, Arizona. He's an amazing talent. Just finished his own TV. Hopefully we'll be hearing about that pretty soon. Michael Olatuja on bass, young guy from Britain. Just joined the band, and he's an amazing talent. Probably one of the most creative young pianists on the jazz scene right now, Fabian Almazan. This guy is amazing. He's the type of musician that really pushes the envelope every night, not because he feels the need to, just because that's just who he is. You know, He does so much experimentation and exploration and harmony, and you'll hear him tomorrow. You'll understand what I'm talking about. The thing about these guys, and Kendrick Scott on drums, was probably the most dynamic guy in his generation. And I'm not saying that because he's in my band. I just feel very, very blessed to have him in the band, because this guy has grown to some heights creatively and musically that are just astounding to me, because there's some things that he does that's hard for me to explain. He's refined his playing in such a way that adds excitement and drama to things that we do on a nightly basis for us. The sad part about it is that you get to hear him one night, you know. You hear him one night and you go, okay, he sounds great. You see, I'll hear him the next night and he'll sound totally different, but still sound great. And like that's the most amazing thing for me that I wish you guys could experience on some level. You know, we toyed around with the idea of doing an album of 1 tune, doing like 6 verses of it. Yeah, but that's the same reaction I got from the record company.
It's a good idea.
So I'm excited about playing with these guys, but I don't, you know, we're probably going to be playing some music from the latest choices. Yes, ma'am.
I have a quick question. Out of all of the different pieces, all the different soundtracks, I think I mentioned to you that I've seen a lot of the films that you've done or done soundtracks for. It was most of my college career was spent watching something you've done. So I wanted to ask you, out of those many things that you've done, do you have a favorite or 2 favorites maybe?
I don't know if I have a favorite, but I do have something I'm proud of. Levy's I'm really proud of, just to be a part of that, because of what it meant to so many people. By the way, Spike is in New Orleans right now doing the follow-up. They're shooting all the interviews right now. But that goes back to the whole thing he was talking about earlier about, you know, being socially aware. And something like that, to be able to use your talents to not only create awareness about a situation or give in-depth information about a situation, but to also help the community. So that I was very, very proud of being a part of that. One that I always talk about is Malcolm X, you know, and because Malcolm X was such a profound experience for us, you know. I remember I had done Jungle Fever. That was my first film that I fully scored. I wrote one scene in Mobile Blues, but Jungle Fever I had fully scored it. That was the first one. So I didn't expect him to call me to do Malcolm X. I knew it was such a big project that I thought he was going to get like a very experienced composer. So when he called me to do it, man, I went into the woodshed. I started listening to a few scores that I knew he loved. Watched the movies, did a lot of homework, studied some scores. Stravinsky is one of my favorite composers, so did a lot of studying in terms of learning orchestration and how those guys develop their ideas. The interesting thing about it is that I became so nervous about doing the project because of what Malcolm X meant to so many people. Man, you just start to feel overwhelmed. You know, this is my second film, and it was, oh man, I can't think of the guy's name. He does all of the set designs for Spike. He'll come to his name will come to me. And I was talking to him, and he said, I told him about my feelings about wanting to make sure that, you know, I did a decent job for the film. Because you have to remember, I'm seeing everything that's shot. So everybody's doing their job, and they finish, and then they give it to me. So I don't want to be that last piece that kind of falls by the wayside, you know. So Wynn Thomas, that's his name, Wynn Thomas. And Wynn told me, he said, I know, he said, we all want to do 150%, but just do your job. And I remember when he told me that, man, I started to relax. And when that film came out, again, the reason why I'm proud of that film is because of what it did in the African-American community in New Orleans that I know of. I remember going to the barbershop right as that movie was being released in New Orleans. And the guy who was cutting my hair, he introduced me to the people in the barber shop. And I had on the Malcolm X hat, you know. He said, yeah, that's the boy, he worked with Spike, you know, he write that music, you know, boom, 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 for that movie. And people wanted to meet me and all of that. That lasted for about 2 seconds. After that, they started talking about the film. Then the discussion went from the film to being responsible African American men. Then what we could do to get to the youth in the community. And I watched this conversation unfold in front of me, and I wasn't even a part of it. You know what I mean? I was just a witness. So I felt very proud to be part of something like that, that could spark a debate about issues in a way that made people, again, reflect, think on it. Yes.
You touched on it briefly, saying that with Dickinson, but you mentioned some of your jazz influences, but I'm wondering who are your influences for orchestra writing?
Well, that's basically it. I mean, you know, I've listened to a lot of guys, which is kind of interesting. Bartok string quartets is a must, you know, because it's a different type of writing, right? It's small. The thing about string quartets that I love is that it's so aggressive and ahead of its time, you know, in terms of how to use those instruments in a small setting. Stravinsky is one, like I said, my favorite. Everybody loves writing string, you know, Petrushka, Firebird, what's the concerto at C, Wagner. I mean, I love all of this. For me, it's not like I have a favorite. For me, I look at all of these guys as moments in time, you know, in different forms of expression. So, you know, sometimes you listen to Wagner and I go, wow, I can really hear how Wagner actually had an influence on jazz. You know, I can hear how Henry had an influence on jazz, you know, harmonically, you know. So I try to look at it from this perspective. I try to look at it and say, okay, how did this guy develop his craft? How did he develop his ideas? What are the things that he used? And the reason why I do that is because, it's like I was telling you earlier, your set of criteria for that may be totally different. But it's okay. Nothing wrong with it. So long as you know how to develop your ideas, so long as you know the fundamentals of harmony and orchestration. Because I mean, writing for orchestra is like building a building. You know, I mean, we all may have these ideas, but if the foundation is weak, the building's not going to stand. So the same thing happens when you write for orchestra. You know, sometimes guys will come up with these ideas, and I said, oh, it's not going to work. They said, well, why? Oh, well, because look, this operates this way, and when you guys play together, it's going to sound like this. You go, oh, no. You go out and try it, and you go, oh, man, you're right. It's not that I'm right, it's science. You know what I mean? And when things vibrate in a certain way, that's what we call harmony, dissonance, you know? So as long as you know about those things, when you start to recognize what it is that's already inside of you, that's your personality, isn't it? And the thing that I love about it is that once you start to become comfortable with it, then you can go back and appreciate all of those other components. You know what I mean? That's why I don't have favorites like that, you know, because I can see value in all of it. One of the things, though, I think is really important, man, to discuss, because it took me a while to get to this, and a lot of guys were telling me about it, it didn't hit me. So, you know, when it hit me like a ton of bricks. One of the things that we struggle with as artists, right, is the difference between who you want to be and who you really are. Sometimes those are two different things. An example I'll give you is I wanted to be Miles Davis. Man, I wanted to be Miles Davis. I would love it when I caught a cold and my voice was hoarse. You know, I thought I was, you know, like Ryan Guidance. Right? I wanted to be Miles until that moment when I met Miles. When I met Miles, I immediately realized that's never going to be me. Never. When I met Wayne, the exact same thing. If any of you know Wayne, you know what I'm talking about, right? But the scary thing is that you have to ask yourself, well, damn, well, who am I? And that's probably one of the most liberating questions that you could ever ask. Because then it puts you on a path of discovery. And once you start to become comfortable with that, then you can go back and really appreciate Miles for what he brought, Dizzy for what he brought. And see, the lesson for me that lesson came to me in the conversation I had with Dizzy Gillespie. We were in, again, we were in Perugia, and Dizzy was in his dressing room before going on stage, and he was playing a ballad on his horn, just by himself in the room. And when he was playing his ballad, I thought he was playing, and he stopped, and he said, man, you know, Miles Davis always played the prettiest notes. Now, that sounds like a very simple statement, right? But for me, that blew me away, because that meant he was really comfortable with who he was. There wasn't no competition. You know, he's like, he was comfortable with himself, and he could really appreciate what Miles brought. That was an eye-opening thing for me. You know, I have a young trumpet student, man, who's on his own, I think, it's Ambrose Akinmusu, man. This guy is really talented. Let me tell you something, man. He does some things on the trumpet. I don't know. I don't even know how he does it. Right? Now, the easy thing for you to do is bust him in the mouth. Make sure he can have to play and steal his idea. But the thing is, I mean, I love the fact that he's brave enough to go out and be himself. You know? So when he came to the Monk Institute, there was no need for me to sit him down and say, hey, man, you really need to check out Clifford Brown. He already done that. He was comfortable with who he was. So for me, it was like, let me make him stronger. You know, let's just make him feel comfortable with that. So when you start talking about composition, just don't wrestle with yourself about it. Don't wrestle with yourself about it. We're all supposed to be different. You know, sometimes I've written some things, and the testament to the fact that you guys are here, that you know, I sit there and go, oh man, because the people here, they respond. They respond. You know, and I'll be willing to bet that you guys do the same thing. I mean, I think you do. But you do. If you're honest, that's the thing. If you're honest in your creation, it's going to touch somebody. Honesty is the thing. You know, and the thing about honesty is you got to deal with it. You can't shy away from it. Because sometimes when you lie to yourself, man, you lie to everybody else. And then insincerity is the thing that kills the driving force of art. You know, art is, you know, it's all about being honest. And dealing with those issues, sometimes we don't want to do it. Yes?
You've been all over the world and you've lots of different kinds of music. How do you feel like New Orleans comes through and bring it with you? Do you feel like it's still there?
Or, you know, what's funny about that, you know, what's funny about that is that coming from New Orleans, you can't, it's like I was telling you can't help people who you are, right? So there are times, you know, sometimes, I'll give you an example. Sometimes we play these tunes that have no chord changes. And we don't have no time signature. So we just like improvise and we just go all over the place, right? So I've listened back to some of those things at certain points. And I have to laugh to myself. Just when I'm thinking I'm being my hippest, I'm basically doing like some New Orleans rants. You know, just in another key against what the guys are doing. You know what I mean? But I'm thinking, oh man, this is revolutionary. Yeah, but the thing is, you know, but that's part of it. It's like, you know, we are all influenced by those things that we experience from the time we start to take our first breath. You know, and I love that. I love that. I love the fact that New Orleans has a vibration that creates a sound. You know what I mean? We had a thing where we just did a thing for our incumbent mayor, Mitch Landy. We had a night called Musicians for Mitch. And we had all of these local musicians go to the House of Blues, and we gave a performance to raise money for him, right? And it was funny, because, you know, I was trying to raise money for this guy, but man, we were having a big time. Because the thing that blew me away was you had all of these musicians from different genres in the world of music in New Orleans. You had Alan Toussaint, you know, you had some guys from Dr. John's band, you had the Dirty Dozen playing. Man, you had some rock and roll guys there that I don't know them that well. But the thing is, there's such a communal vibe in the music. We all had a great time. And there were those all relate to. And those were the things that was the common ground for us, and it all worked. So that's that New Orleans, that's the culture of New Orleans that exists. Even though it goes into these various pockets of the music world, it still stems from this core. So that's inside of me as well. So even when I think I'm doing my hips, I ain't doing nothing.
Yeah, I find myself telling my students, it's like, okay, you're on 12 notes, literally you're on 12 notes, so, how revolutionary do you think, or do you think you're actually going to be?
Right.
And we've been dealing with these 12 notes for a few years now, just, throughout the history of music. As soon as you think that you created something new, if you look back far enough, you realize, that's already been, done before. Going back to what you were speaking of as far as being honest with yourself and composing, how do you balance really being honest with yourself as far as who you want to be as a musician or artist, no matter what the medium, and relating it to the real world of, is this going to be marketable? Will there be the higher powers that come to me and say, okay, I think we're going to finance it and get it to a larger platform? I mean, how do you really balance what you feel with the actuality that is the marketing issue that drives a lot of what we listen to?
Well, I tend to take the view that our Blake used to tell us all the time. Our Blake used to say in music, he said, never speak above your audience, never speak beneath them, just speak straight to them. And that's what we try to do musically. I don't think in terms of like the commercialization of what we do, because my feeling is that if I'm speaking directly to you, right, then there's going to be a vibration that permeates anyway. That's going to happen, right? Case in point, whenever we've done like with the last CD, man, whenever we play this music with the vocal stuff that we do, people respond to it. And I think it's because, okay, let me back up. One of the other things our baby used to tell me all the time, he said the easiest thing to do is to write some music nobody can play. That's easy. With a bunch of notes in it, jumping all over the place, difficult rhythmic pattern. He said, but the hardest thing to do is to write something that moves people and still gets your point across. So, and for me, finding that balance has to start by saying to myself, I'm not going to speak above my audience's head, which means I'm not speaking above my head either, because, I can sit there and go, oh, okay, let me do this, and, but that's not really what my heart is. Anyway, I'm just not there. From all of the great artists that I love seem to carry that trait. I was on the road with Herbie Hancock for 10 weeks, man, and playing with him every night for 10 weeks. It was amazing because he would make some profound musical statements, but he did it in such a way that it got across a large audience. We played 10 weeks of concert halls in Europe, and all of them were packed. And all of them, he got standing ovation for playing the type of music he played. And I think the reason for that is that, A, he's coming from a place of being truthful, being honest. And he's, excuse my language, but he's not trying to bullshit nobody. He's just being direct and honest. And I think people respond to that. It's like anything else. I mean, if you go to a lecture someplace and the guy is like using big words and all these phrases to make himself sound important, that's gonna turn you off. Even if you really understand what he's saying. Because it's not getting at the core of it, it's like a Zen philosophy, it's not getting to the core of what it is you're trying to say. So I think if you do that, all of those other things will fall in place. And the reason why I say that is because the most successful people that I've known, whether it be in film or music, that's what they do. That's what they do. I give you a little sneak peek of something. I shouldn't be talking about it since we're on this topic. I just got to stay in this room. I just recorded on a track with Sonja Wilson for an album that she's doing, right? And we brought in a friend of mine, who's a spoken word, named Common, right? So, if Common, myself, and Cassandra Wilson are doing this track, we really got into the track. We got into the thing and, you know, started really trying to figure out some things. Then we started talking about doing other projects. Some people will say, oh man, you guys are trying to venture out. No, it has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that we felt strongly about what it is that we were doing. It was a great vibe, a great feeling, and we want more of that, simple, right? And for us, one of the things that we talked about in the studio that night is breaking down some of those barriers, breaking down some of those ideas, you know, about these camps of music, you know, because, you know, I don't necessarily believe in that stuff. I never have. You know, whether it be classical, jazz, or even the various forms of both of those, or even pop music, I just don't believe in it. You know, because I run into too many great musicians in all various camps. You know, and ignorance bounds also in all various camps. So for me, there's two kinds of music, like you said.
Ladies and gentlemen, Terence